Welcome back to the conversation. I'm still Francesca Fiorentini. Thanks for being here. And my next guest has just written a book that I think will interest a lot of you. It is called What If Solving the Climate Crisis is Simple? Music to my ears. Please welcome author and speaker and communication consultant Tom Bowman. Tom, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So tell me why you decided to write this book, which The Guardian said it's one of 30 books to help us understand the world in 2020, which I need all 30 of those books now.
We all do. Yeah. Well, I decided to write this because I've been working on public engagement with the climate issue for about 15, 20 years. And throughout that time, it all started with science communication, basically explaining what climate change is to the public. And what's become obvious over all of this time is that those messages are valuable, but they're insufficient.
Mhm.
And as scientists have sort of dominated the communication landscape, what's happened is that we've been taught that climate change is this complicated sort of Gordian knot of global systems that all interact with each other. So if you want to solve food, pretty soon you're dealing with transportation and urban infrastructure and energy generation. And it becomes so overwhelming that we all feel small and kind of useless,
Yeah.
right? At the same time that emissions are rising, there's another trend, which is the drop in prices for renewable energy, the availability of new technologies that are affordable, like electric transportation. I decarbonized my own design business that I used to own and discovered how easy it is to squeeze waste out of the system without actually harming, influencing anybody's lifestyle in a meaningful way. And it tells a story that there's a lot of productive work going on that we can be hopeful about and that we can actually participate in if we recast just the way we think about what climate change is.
Mm. And so rather than a sort of difficult to understand world systems, economic markets interfacing with,
Hmm.
yes, with food prices and oil prices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and very scientific on top of that in terms of how many degrees to keep us to.
Right.
What is your answer? What is the sort of, how is it simple for everyday folks and even politicians?
Well, if we set that assumption that climate change is this incredibly complicated problem aside for a moment,
Mhm.
what do we see? It almost all boils down to one thing. We burn too much coal, oil, and natural gas, right? The solution is just to stop burning coal, oil, and natural gas. It doesn't mean that we have to change what we do. It means we just change how we do it.
Yeah.
And and when you set that as your singular, simple focus, it means that everything we do is amenable to a reduction in emissions. Everything every business does, every church does, every organization does. Now, my own emissions might be small, but in aggregate, they're huge with
Mhm.
everyone else. And part of the problem we have in climate communication is that we've always focused on little things that we want individuals to do. So at
Yes.
the end of Al Gore's terrific movie, the credits roll and it says, "Please change one light bulb." And you
The
think
worst part of that movie. That was like,
it was so out of scale with the problem. But the reality is, lots of people are doing lots of things. We just don't talk about it. We don't cover it. We don't bring it forward. And so we haven't created a shared culture that says we are working on climate action together. And if
mm.
we do that, all of a sudden we discover how much energy and creativity and initiative there actually is in our midst.
Now, let me just ask you because, obviously, I think uh, we all revere Bill McKibben. And
Mhm.
I know you've interfaced with him, and he basically says we have to, if we're going to rein in the climate crisis, we have to take on the fossil fuel industry directly, not just sort of skirt around them and go to renewables, because they are going to squeeze every last drop of oil off this planet as they possibly can. What is
They
your
will.
response to that?
My response was that it takes a village of approaches.
Mm,
And my main interest has always been to shift the culture underneath the climate issue so that there's a possibility of agreement that breaks down this ridiculous divide between deniers and scientists, between the left and right, between the oil companies and their influence and the rest of us who feel powerless. Yes, we need to take on the fossil fuel industry, but the question is, can you do that and can I do that? Or can we be part of solutions that support the taking on of the climate systems or the oil fossil fuel companies, so that we vote for candidates who will do the right thing, rather than letting climate be sort of a low-level interest that never influences the way we vote.
Sure. Yes. And we're definitely seeing that now with Ed Markey's reelection and the Sunrise Movement and the way they turned out for
Right.
him. Yeah, I mean, I think the question for me is, I think the answer that I'm getting from you is essentially renewables. That yes, capitalism and that the way that we overconsume and drive and fly is a problem, and eat meat, etc. But if we can put renewables as a replacement, we can wean ourselves off those other things. But renewables was really where it's at. My question is it gonna succeed if it doesn't make someone money? This is the thing. It's like, if it doesn't make anyone rich, Americans, especially corporations, are so slow to get on board.
Yeah. So there's a couple of prongs to this. One is that we start where we are, right? And so how capitalism is going to evolve, how technology and economic opportunity are going to evolve, is based around innovation that none of us can really predict. Who thought? I mean, if Tesla hadn't come along, an electric car would be a golf cart that no one would want. And yet they made it so attractive that everybody wants one now, right? So we can all reduce our consumption of energy. It's really surprisingly easy to do. We can vote for candidates. We can spur the market towards greener products. And this creates all kinds of economic opportunity for entrepreneurs who are creating new businesses to sort of create a new model. Even in COVID, where we're all locked away at home, we're watching a tremendous revolution in the way people work, right?
Yeah.
And that's creating new businesses, new opportunities for business that were not even conceivable as little as a year ago. And so this means that if we start pushing ourselves and to show sort of leadership among ourselves and with our friends and family and coworkers and so forth, it helps drive innovation and creates opportunities that have yet to be realized.
Sure.
And that is an enormous amount of economic opportunity. We're up against the powers that be. Don't get me wrong. They're still powerful and they're still there.
Tesla's still a $70,000 car.
It's a $70,000 car that costs as much to own as a Corolla, because gasoline costs so much more than electricity, and there's no maintenance on an electric car.
Yeah.
So this huge sticker price scares people off, but the studies of cost of ownership show that it's actually not a bad thing to have, and by comparison. So we're in a phase of adjustment. There's no question.
Right. Well, let me ask you about the Biden administration and your hopes for what he will do in the first, year, even 100 days. John Kerry's been appointed as, I guess, climate czar or something. What are your thoughts on where he's going to go?
Well, I think that the appointment of John Kerry was a stroke of genius. He's a cabinet member, a climate envoy who sits on the National Security Council, and he's highly respected for having negotiated the Paris Agreement. That in and of itself does an enormous amount. If the Senate remains in Republican hands, it means that Biden is mostly going to work through executive action, just like Obama did. But there are other things that can be done. You can regulate with the SEC. You can demand that corporations disclose their climate risks every year, and that means that the marketplace will value those companies differently. And that's huge, right?
Yes.
There's also something called the Action for Climate Empowerment Agenda as part of the Paris Agreement, and it calls for every country to develop a national strategy to engage its public in participating in finding solutions to the climate crisis. And I've been involved with a project with about 150 other people to develop a framework for creating a national strategy. No major emitting country has yet submitted one to the UN climate process. If the Biden administration were to say, we're going to lead on that and
Yeah.
engage America's really diverse climate and climate justice leaders in forming a national strategy for public engagement, that would be an enormous step forward.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't have to rely on Congress to do it.
Yeah. Finally, how do we fight against fatalism when it comes to climate change?
I think a key part of it is to talk about what we want. I want cleaner air. I imagine you do too. I want more humane relationships with people of other races who don't look like me. I want a neighborhood that feels safer, right? I want to live longer. I don't want African Americans and other people of color to suffer asthma at much higher rates than I do. If we start talking about creating the society we've always wanted to have, that's very different than just saying, be afraid and try not to do the things that are so destructive.
That is absolutely right. It's not just about the polar bears, although they are cute. Ferocious, very cute.
Cute.
But yes, it is about healthy communities, and here in California, not having it, rain ash every 3 months.
Exactly. The air quality's been terrible here in California.
Tom Bowman, thank you so much for joining us. Tom's book is What If Solving the Climate Crisis is Simple? Get it, understand 2020 and the fight ahead of us. I love this. We need to be more positive, and I think we are turning that corner right now. And, save for a Tesla or whatever.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Tom. Take care.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.